hydroxychloroquine. Leave this in. Joe Rogan and his treatment after he contracted COVID is causing a lot of controversy. Obviously, I have no opinion on coronavirus and how to treat it, but I do have opinions on media and how media behaves with regard to particular issues, what biases are in play, what prejudices are at work, and what attitudes they reveal. Let's have a look at ivermectin, COVID solutions, their efficacy, but most importantly, how are these things discussed?
They keep saying I'm taking horse dewormer. I literally got it from a doctor. It's an American company.
Mm-hmm.
They won the Nobel Prize in 2015 for use in human beings.
Yeah.
And CNN is saying I'm taking horse dewormer.
Yeah. What? So
they must know that that's a lie.
Well, there's a lot of people saying it.
Once again, to be absolutely clear, because this is on YouTube and I don't want any aggravation, I'm not recommending anyone does anything. I really don't feel inclined to or qualified to do anything of that nature. But what happened when Joe Rogan caught coronavirus on tour was he treated himself with a number of things, including ivermectin, monoclonal antibodies, vitamin C IV stuff. You know, like, of course, Joe Rogan is in a fortunate financial position where if he does contract any disease, I imagine he has access to the best medical treatments available. Of course, what people are querying is whether or not Joe Rogan is vaccinated. I don't know. I don't know if he's ever publicly spoken about that. There are so many issues bundled together around this story. But what I find interesting is the way that Rogan has been treated by what you'd have to call the mainstream media and their appetite to condemn and in some ways with particular bias the course of action that he took. I got some clarity on this issue by reading Matt Taibbi's piece on Substack. He said, the WHO has advised against ivermectin's use pending further studies. There have been randomized studies showing it to be ineffective in speeding recovery, and the drug's original manufacturer, Merck, has said there's no meaningful evidence of efficacy for COVID-19 patients. However, it's also patently untrue, as is frequently asserted, that there's no evidence that the drug might be effective. So it seems that there is some. This past week, for instance, Oxford University announced it was launching a large-scale clinical trial. The study has already recruited more than 5,000 volunteers, and its announcement says what little is known to be true, that small pilot studies show that early administration with ivermectin can reduce viral load and the duration of symptoms in some patients with mild COVID-19. That it's a well-known medicine with a good safety profile, and because of the early promising results in some studies, it's already being widely used to treat COVID-19 in several countries. What interests me about this story is the politicization of information. Perhaps we shouldn't be surprised by that because it's something we've witnessed around every single news story for a little while now. It seems there's very little objectivity, little ability to come together in union. Everything is used as an opportunity to score points, either for what is regarded as the left and right, but what some people would argue are kind of false divisions, old-fashioned divisions, out-of-date divisions. Nonetheless, it's difficult to get clarity. With coronavirus, surely whether we're talking about the vaccines or potential treatments, it should just be, there is this problem, coronavirus, and the problem is causing all manner of consequent difficulties as a result of the lockdowns, the controversy. Let's look at the medical treatment as objectively as we possibly can. That doesn't seem to be what's happening. Much of the reporting around Joe Rogan, for example, seemed to initially take delight that he had coronavirus, kind of wanted him to suffer as a result of it, and was deeply cynical about the method of his treatment. As Joe Rogan said in his podcast, he did get better very, very quickly, suggesting that, at least in his case, the course of treatment that he took was effective. But it oughtn't be a political thing. If you're a person who wants to be vaccinated, you should become vaccinated if you're comfortable with the information that you've been given around that subject. If you're a person that doesn't want to be vaccinated, you should be entitled to make your decision. Now, what people, of course, will say is you not being vaccinated will affect other people. Now, I think that's actually a fantastic attitude if you want to consider the way your actions affect other people. And in fact, I would love to see that attitude applied across a whole host of issues, from distribution of wealth, public speech, education, how your personal actions affect others. And if that's not something you're really into, then it's interesting that it's being applied stringently in one area of public and medical life and not others. The sort of rise of authoritarianism around this subject for me causes some concern. What I would like to see is open, plain communication and individual liberty and freedom to choose what course of action you want to take. The Oxford text also says there's little evidence from large-scale randomised controlled trials to demonstrate it can speed up recovery from the illness or reduce hospital admission, but to a person who might have a family member suffering from the disease, the information about early promising results would probably be enough to inspire demands for a prescription, which might be a problem, of course. Unless someone was looking for that information, they wouldn't find it, as mainstream news of even the Oxford study has been effectively limited to a pair of Bloomberg and Forbes stories. Unless there's transparency and communication that has good faith behind it rather than obviously bad faith, it's really easy to assume that there are agendas at play, like that people would prefer you to take a certain course of action, and that preference is not necessarily based on the well-being of people in general, but other incentives. And if what you desire is a positive outcome for everybody, then surely that's coming from a place of kindness, compassion and tolerance. And I recognise compassion, kindness and tolerance when I see it in the way that people communicate, in the kind of their openness and good-heartedness. So I think if you don't understand why people would be cynical about pharmaceutical companies and the government, then I don't think you've been paying attention for the last 20 years. It's clear that there's a degree of circumspection is judicious when dealing with centralised bodies. You only need to look at the legal histories of pharmaceutical companies. Again, I'm not suggesting any course of action for a medical situation. It's not something I feel qualified to deal with for anybody other than myself, and barely even in that instance. But what I will say is that in an environment of outward hostility, judgment, condemnation, good outcomes are difficult to achieve. Ivermectin has suffered the same fate of thousands of other news topics since Donald Trump first announced his run of presidency nearly 6 years ago. Cleaved in two to inhabit separate factual universes for left and right audiences, repurposed drugs generally have a hard time being taken seriously since Trump announced he was on hydroxychloroquine last year. And Ivermectin clearly also suffers from its association with Republican senators like Ron Johnson. Still, the drug's publicity issues go beyond the taint of conservative news. The drug has become a test case for a controversy that's long been building in healthcare about how much input patients should have in their own treatment. Well before COVID-19, the medical profession was thrust into a revolution in patients' information inspired by a combination of Google and new patients' rights laws. Should people on their deathbeds be allowed to try anything to save themselves? That seems like an easy question to answer. Should the entire world be allowed to practice self-care on a grand scale? That's a different issue. Some would say absolutely not, while others would say the corruption of pharmaceutical companies and the medical system unfortunately makes it a necessity. The world is increasingly divided along this trust-untrust axis. Interesting and I would say accurate analysis there. So I suppose going forward with coronavirus, with high profile cases, with the treatment of it or the prevention of it, an attitude of openness and kindness is necessary, of non-judgment, of prioritising science and recognising that science is not free from biases, that science exists within certain economic and financial constraints with certain economic and financial imperatives. And one way of creating more trust would be the removal of those constraints, the removal of those imperatives, so that true transparency could be achieved. I know you're going to want to join in this conversation, so jump into the comments below, but try to demonstrate this kind of compassion. Try to observe yourself. If you're like, yeah, but I know someone that's had COVID. Yeah, but I don't know. Watch it. Try to observe the feeling that you're having. Try to observe it. Stay awake. Stay conscious. Try to think, why does this provoke this response in me? Why are my emotions so easily punctured, provoked in this way? What is it I'm not owning in myself? What am I projecting? It's interesting to look at that stuff. Sign up to my mailing list if you want more direct communication with me. I'm doing some live stuff this weekend. There's a link in the description to that. If you enjoyed this video, have a look at this one. And if you want more stuff about awakening and how you can become a more peaceful, at ease person, look at this, because you don't want to spend your whole time angry and furious, because you have the possibility of being free.